Looking through the viewfinder and crossing the threshold of the unknown, we uncover stories hidden in plain sight. Experience the profound moments of discovery that altered the course of human history.
See, the thing is, anybody could put a uniform on. That doesn't mean anything
I have
to me.
provided my military ID, my travel orders, and my service number. Everything you asked for, twice.
The documents look off to me, the formatting, the signature. I've seen fakes before, and I know what I'm looking at. Hey,
I do not stop moving.
Okay, stop moving right now, or this gets a whole lot worse for you.
I am not resisting.
Where did you actually get this uniform? Who gave it to you? Because nobody who actually served acts like
It's
this.
going to mean nothing to me. You understand that? Nothing.
Last chance. You tell me right now.
Airport security officer Conrad Hale had a habit of deciding who belonged in a terminal before they ever opened their mouths. And on the afternoon, he spotted a black man in a naval uniform walking through Gate C of Hartsfield Regional Airport. He made that decision in under 4 seconds. He blocked his path, questioned his credentials, and when the man produced every single document he asked for, Hale called it fraud and called for backup anyway. What Conrad Hale didn't know was that the man standing in front of him in that uniform had served this country for 19 years, carried 3 military decorations on his chest, and was about to become the face of a national conversation that would follow Hale's name for the rest of his life. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're tuning in from. Here at JPTV, if you believe that a uniform earned through 19 years of service to this country deserves more respect than what you are about to see, then hit that like button and subscribe. Because we tell the stories that remind people exactly what kind of courage it takes to serve a country that does not always return the favor. Vander Cruz was 41 years old and had spent 19 of those years inside the United States Navy. He had enlisted at 22, fresh out of Dillard University in New Orleans, where he had studied political science on a partial academic scholarship, and spent his final year quietly certain that the classroom was not where his life was supposed to happen next. He had grown up in Trim, one of the oldest black neighborhoods in New Orleans. In a house on St. Claude Avenue, where his grandmother kept a photograph of his grandfather in his Army uniform on the mantelpiece above the fireplace. He had looked at that photograph for as long as he could remember. And when he signed his enlistment papers on a Tuesday morning in June, he did it with the particular kind of resolve that comes not from impulse, but from a decision that has been forming for years. 19 years later, that resolve had a record attached to it. Evander had served 3 overseas deployments, 2 of them in active conflict zones. He had completed advanced training in naval intelligence operations and had spent the last 4 years working out of the naval station in Norfolk, Virginia, as a senior chief petty officer, a rank that placed him among the most experienced non-commissioned officers in the entire enlisted structure of the United States Navy. The decorations on his chest were not ceremonial. The Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal had come from his 2nd deployment. The Navy Commendation Medal had come from his 3rd. The Meritorious Service Medal, the one that sat highest on his left breast, had been awarded at a formal ceremony in Norfolk 14 months ago in recognition of a classified operation that his commanding officer had described in the citation as demonstrating exceptional judgment under conditions of extraordinary pressure. He was wearing all of it on the afternoon of Thursday, the 9th of March, when he walked into Hartsfield Regional Airport on Aviation Parkway in College Park, Georgia, at 12:47 in the afternoon. He was in his full-dress uniform. Navy service uniform in the correct configuration, cover on his head, decorations properly mounted, shoes polished to the standard he had maintained without interruption for 19 years. He had a flight to catch. United Airlines Flight 2847, departing from Gate C-14 at 2:15, connecting through Dulles International to Norfolk. He had a meeting at the station the following morning at 0800, and he had allowed himself what he considered a reasonable amount of time to get through the terminal comfortably. He had checked in at the main desk on the departures level, cleared the TSA screening checkpoint at the North Security Lane without incident, and was moving through the Gate C corridor towards C-14 with his carry-on bag over one shoulder and his boarding pass in his left hand. The terminal was busy the way large airports are always busy on Thursday afternoons, rolling luggage, overhead announcements, the particular ambient noise of hundreds of people, all moving toward different destinations at the same time. Evander moved through it the way he moved through most things, steadily and without drawing attention to himself, his eyes on the gate numbers above the corridor. He was passing the entrance to the Gate C food court, approximately 40 meters from C-14, when Conrad Hale stepped into his path. Hale was 34, a 5-year employee of the Hartsfield Regional Airport Security Division, assigned to the Gate C concourse on the afternoon shift. He was broad across the shoulders with a close haircut and the permanently narrowed eyes of a man who had decided that suspicion was the same thing as diligence. His record at this division was not distinguished. He had received one formal commendation in 5 years, a routine citation for assisting a passenger with a medical episode near Gate C6 in 2021. He had also received 2 informal complaints from passengers who had described his conduct during security checks as unnecessarily aggressive, both of which had been noted and filed without further action. He had been standing near the food court entrance for approximately 10 minutes when Evander came through the corridor. Later, when investigators reviewed the terminal footage, they would note that Hale had allowed 4 other passengers to pass that same point in the 4 minutes before Evander arrived. None of them had been stopped. None of them had been wearing a uniform. None of them had been black. Hale moved directly into Evander's path and held up one hand. "Sir, I need you to stop for a moment." Evander stopped. He looked at Hale with a calm, measured expression and said nothing, waiting for whatever came next. "Can I ask where you're headed today?" Hale said. Evander told him Gate C-14, United flight to Dulles. Hale looked him up and down slowly, his eyes moving across the uniform with the particular attention of someone searching for something wrong rather than confirming something right. "And the uniform," he said. "You're active military?" Evander told him he was. Senior Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy, Naval Station, Norfolk. Hale nodded in the way people nod when they are not processing what they have just been told but are simply waiting for their next question to be ready. "I'm going to need to see some identification," he said. "Military ID, orders, anything that confirms your service status." Evander set his carry-on bag down on the floor beside him, unzipped the front pocket, and produced his military identification card. It was a Department of Defense Common Access card, standard issue, with his photograph, his name, his rank, his branch of service, and his service number printed clearly on the front. He held it out toward Hale. Hale took it and looked at it for a long time, longer than looking at an ID card requires. He turned it over, examined the back, turned it to the front again. Then he looked at Evander. "You got anything else? Orders, documentation, deployment papers, anything like that?" Evander reached back into the front pocket of his bag and produced a copy of his current travel orders, printed on official Naval Station Norfolk letterhead, signed by his commanding officer, and dated 4 days prior. He held them out without a word. Hale took those too. He read through them slowly, one page at a time, with the labored attention of a man performing thoroughness rather than actually exercising it. When he finished, he looked up and said, "I'm going to need to verify these." Evander asked him how long that would take. He pointed out that his flight departed in just under 90 minutes. Hale told him it would take as long as it took. Then he reached for the radio on his shoulder and called for a second officer to join him at the Gate C food court entrance. And the tone of his voice when he made that call was the tone of a man who had already decided that the documents in his hand were not what they said they were, and that the man standing in front of him in a 19-year uniform was not who he said he was. Evander watched him make the call. He stood with his hands at his sides and his carry-on bag on the floor beside him, in the middle of a public airport corridor with people moving around him on both sides. Some of them already slowing down to look, some of them already reaching for their phones without fully deciding why yet. He had faced harder things than this in places far less comfortable than an airport terminal in College Park, Georgia. He had sat in briefing rooms at 0300 in active conflict zones and made decisions that carried consequences he would carry for the rest of his life. He had earned every decoration on his chest in conditions that Conrad Hale could not begin to imagine. So he stood still. He kept his face composed. He let Hale make his call and waited for whatever came next with the patience of a man who understood, from long experience, that how you carry yourself in the worst moments is the only thing that nobody can ever take from you afterward. The second officer arrived from the direction of Gate C8 2 minutes later, and when he reached Hale and the two of them stood together looking at Evander, it was immediately clear from the way they looked at each other that the second officer had not come to resolve anything. He had come to agree with whatever Hale had already decided, and that was the moment the situation stopped being a misunderstanding and became something else entirely. The second officer's name was Lauren Pickett, and he had been working the Gate C concourse for 3 years. He arrived at the food court entrance with his chest already forward and his eyes already set in the way men look when they have decided before arriving that they are needed for something serious. Hale handed him the military ID and the travel orders without explanation, and Pickett looked at them the same way Hale had, slowly, deliberately turning them over like the problem was somewhere on the back that he just hadn't found yet. Then he handed them back to Hale and looked at Evander with the flat, assessing stare of a man who had already aligned himself with whatever conclusion Hale had drawn before he walked over. "These documents," Pickett said, gesturing toward the papers in Hale's hand. "Where exactly did you get these printed?" Evander told him they were printed at Naval Station Norfolk on official letterhead, signed by his commanding officer and dated 4 days ago. He said it clearly and without irritation, the same way he had said everything else since the stop began. Pickett nodded slowly. "Because the formatting looks off to me," he said. "The header doesn't look right." Evander looked at him for a moment. "That is the standard format for Naval Station Norfolk travel orders," he said. "It has not changed in over a decade." Pickett looked at Hale. Hale looked at the papers again. Neither of them said anything for a few seconds, which was itself an answer. Because a man who genuinely believed the formatting was wrong would have been able to say specifically what was wrong with it. Pickett could not, because there was nothing wrong with it. The formatting was correct. The signature was legitimate. The letterhead was exactly what it was supposed to be. But none of that was the point. And all three of them standing in that corridor knew it. Hale told Evander that they were going to need to contact the naval station directly to verify his service status before they could allow him to continue to his gate. Evander asked him how long that process would take. Hale said he wasn't sure. Evander pointed out again that his flight left in just over 80 minutes and that gate C-14 was 40 meters away. Hale said he understood that and that there was nothing he could do about it. A small group of people had gathered at a loose distance around the food court entrance by now. Not a crowd, but enough. A family with 2 children standing near the entrance to the food court, an older white woman who had stopped rolling her suitcase and was watching openly, a young man near the gate seating area who had his phone raised at chest height with the screen facing outward. Nobody was intervening. Nobody was asking questions. They were just watching, the way people watch when something is happening in public that they recognize as wrong but haven't yet decided what to do about. Evander stood with his hands at his sides and waited while Hale made a second radio call. This one was longer than the first, and when Hale came off the radio, he told Evander that a supervisor had been notified and was on the way. He said it like it was good news. It wasn't, because the supervisor who arrived 4 minutes later was not someone who came to straighten the situation out. He was a floor supervisor named Webb Creel, 29 years old and 8 months into his role. And the first thing he did when he arrived and looked at Evander was ask Hale what the problem was, rather than asking Evander anything at all. That single choice told Evander everything he needed to know about how the next few minutes were going to go. Creel looked at the documents, asked the same questions that had already been asked and answered twice, and then told Evander that until verification came through from the naval station, he was going to have to step to the side of the corridor. Evander asked if he was being detained. Creel said he was being asked to cooperate. Evander said he had been cooperating since the moment he was stopped and had provided every document he had been asked to provide. Creel told him that his attitude wasn't helping. That word, attitude, landed in the corridor like something thrown, because Evander had not raised his voice once. He had not been aggressive, had not been uncooperative, had not done anything other than stand in a public airport in his correct uniform, with his correct documents, and answer every question put to him with complete accuracy. Calling that an attitude was not a description. It was a warning. It was Creel telling him, in the language that people in authority use when they want to remind someone of their position, that his calmness was being read as defiance, and that defiance had consequences. Evander said nothing. He picked up his carry-on bag, moved to the side of the corridor as he had been asked, and stood against the wall between a row of seats in the food court entrance, while 3 airport security employees stood in front of him and discussed his documentation as though he were not there. 20 minutes passed. No verification came through. The flight to Dulles was now 60 minutes from departure. Hale made another radio call, this one requesting a 4th officer, and when that officer arrived and took up a position to Evander's left, the geometry of the situation changed completely. It was no longer a stop, it was a perimeter. 4 security employees arranged around one man against a wall in a busy public terminal, with a growing number of people watching from every angle, and not one of them had produced a single legitimate reason for any of it. Then Hale told Evander to put his bag on the floor and place his hands where they could be seen. Evander put the bag down. He raised his hands slowly to chest height, palms forward, and looked straight ahead at the corridor where 40 meters away, Gate C-14 was visible and his flight was still boarding. Then Creel stepped forward and everything got worse. Creel stepped forward and put his hand on Evander's shoulder, and that was the moment the stop became something that could not be walked back. Evander did not pull away, did not raise his voice, did not do anything that could be described later as resistance. But he looked at Creel's hand on his shoulder and said, "I'm not going to do that," quietly and clearly, that he did not consent to being touched without cause. Creel told him to stop talking. Hale moved in from the left. The 4th officer closed the gap from the right. And before the people watching from the food court entrance had fully processed what was happening, Evander Cruz had fully processed what was happening. Senior Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy, 19 years of service, 3 military decorations, was on the floor of Hartsfield Regional Airport with 2 men on top of him and his cheek pressed against the cold tile of the Gate C corridor. The terminal noise continued around them. Overhead announcements kept coming. Somewhere nearby, a child started crying. The young man who had his phone raised at chest height had it fully raised now, and he was not the only one. At least 4 other phones were recording from different angles, and the people holding them were no longer pretending to be doing anything else. Evander did not struggle. He lay still with his hands visible and his breathing controlled. The same breathing discipline he had learned in conditions that made this floor feel like nothing. And he waited, because struggling was not going to help him. Struggling was going to be used against him. He understood that clearly, and the clarity of it, the fact that he had to understand it at all, was its own kind of weight. Hale was talking into his radio again. Creel had his knee on Evander's back. The 4th officer was standing over him with his arms folded, looking down at a decorated naval officer on a public airport floor, like the situation was entirely normal and entirely resolved. None of them were looking at the phones. None of them were looking at the crowd that had now grown from a loose gathering into a wide, silent semicircle of travelers who had stopped moving entirely. It was at this point that Douglas Henn walked through the Gate C security checkpoint. Henn was 57, a 22-year veteran of the Atlanta Airport Authority and the current senior operations supervisor for the entire Hartsfield Regional Terminal Complex. He was a large man, unhurried in the way that people are unhurried when they have been doing a job long enough that almost nothing surprises them anymore. He had come down to the Gate C concourse for an entirely unrelated matter, a scheduling issue at the C concourse staffing desk, and he was moving through the corridor with a clipboard under one arm and a coffee in his other hand when he saw the crowd. He stopped. He looked at the semicircle of people. He looked at the phones. He looked at the 4 security employees. And then he looked at the man on the floor, and his face changed. He knew Evander Cruz, not personally, not from any prior meeting, but he knew the uniform and he knew the decorations on it, because Douglas Henn had spent 4 years in the United States Navy himself before moving into civilian work, and the medals on Evander's chest were not decorations that were given lightly or often. He recognized the Meritorious Service Medal immediately. He recognized what it meant, and he looked from that medal to the knee on the back of the man wearing it and felt something move through him that he did not take the time to name. He handed his coffee to the nearest bystander without looking at who it was and walked directly into the middle of the scene. "Get up," he said to Creel. His voice was not loud. It was the voice of a man who did not need volume, because the weight behind the words was sufficient on its own. "Get off him right now." Creel looked up at Hen and started to say something about an ongoing verification process. Hen looked at him with an expression that ended the sentence before it finished. "I said, get up." Creel got up. Hale stepped back. The fourth officer moved away without being told. Hen reached down and offered Evander his hand. Evander took it and stood up from the floor of the Gate C corridor, and when he was upright, he straightened his cover, adjusted his uniform jacket, and looked straight ahead with an expression that gave nothing away. Not anger, not humiliation, not relief. Just the face of a man who has decided that what just happened to him is going to matter, and that the way he carries himself in this moment is part of how he makes sure it does. Hen looked at the decorations on Evander's chest for a long moment. Then he looked at Hale and Creel and the fourth officer standing uselessly to the side, and when he spoke, his voice had dropped to something quieter and considerably more dangerous than anything he had said before. "Do any of you have any idea," he said, "who you just put on the ground?" Nobody answered. The corridor was completely silent except for the ambient noise of the terminal and the soft, continuous sound of phones still recording. Douglas Hen did not handle it in the corridor. He waited until Evander had been formally acknowledged, escorted to a private airport authority room off the Gate C concourse, and offered water and a seat before anyone said another word about what had just happened. Hale, Creel, and the fourth officer were separated immediately and told to wait in different locations. None of them were told why they were being separated, but all of them understood. The phones had been out. The crowd had been large. The man they had put on the floor was standing in a room down the corridor being addressed as senior chief by a supervisor who had served in the same Navy, and the distance between where they were now and where they had been 30 minutes ago on that corridor floor was the distance between a mistake and a catastrophe. It was already a catastrophe. They just hadn't seen the full shape of it yet. Evander missed his flight. He sat in that room and gave a full statement to Hen and to the two airport authority investigators who arrived within the hour, and he gave it the same way he had conducted himself throughout the entire incident. Clearly, precisely, and without embellishment. He stated the time he entered the corridor. He stated every question he had been asked and every document he had provided. He stated the moment Creel put his hand on his shoulder and the moment he was taken to the floor. He gave them badge numbers, physical descriptions, and a timeline accurate to the minute. When he was finished, he asked for a copy of his statement, was told one would be provided, and then he called his attorney in Norfolk from the same phone he had been carrying in his jacket pocket the entire time. The attorney's name was not in the newspapers until the following week, but the video was in the newspapers by that evening. The young man who had been recording from near the gate seating area had posted the footage online within an hour of the incident. It was 43 seconds long, and it showed everything from the moment Creel stepped forward to the moment Hen told the officers to get up. It showed the knee on the back. It showed the decorations on Evander's chest, clearly visible even from the angle of the recording. It showed the crowd, it showed the phones, and it showed Evander standing up, straightening his uniform, and looking straight ahead with the kind of composure that, when placed next to everything that preceded it, made the footage impossible to watch without feeling the full weight of what had happened in that corridor. By midnight, it had been viewed 2 million times. By the following morning, it was on every major national news network. The chyrons were all variations of the same thing: decorated naval officer pinned to airport floor by security, accused of wearing a fake uniform. The naval station in Norfolk released a statement by noon confirming Evander's rank, his service record, and the legitimacy of every decoration on his chest. The statement was 4 paragraphs long, and the last paragraph noted, without elaborating further, that the company had been fined for violating the law, that the matter had been referred to the appropriate legal channels. The lawsuits were filed within 10 days. Evander's attorney filed against the airport authority, against the security division that employed Hale and Creel, and against the individuals directly involved in the incident. The filing was detailed and specific, and the damages being sought were significant enough that the airport authority's legal team began settlement discussions before the first court date had even been scheduled. Hale was terminated within 2 weeks. Creel was terminated the same day. The fourth officer received a suspension that the union immediately began contesting, which itself became a secondary story that ran for several weeks in the local press. The congressional response came faster than anyone expected. Two members of the House Armed Services Committee released a joint statement calling the incident a national disgrace and requesting a formal inquiry into the treatment of active military personnel in civilian public spaces. The inquiry was opened. It was still ongoing 3 months later when Evander gave a single television interview, his only one, sitting in his dress uniform in a quiet room in Norfolk with his hands folded on the table in front of him. The interviewer asked him what he wanted people to take away from what happened. Evander was quiet for a moment. Then he said that he did not go to that airport looking for a fight. He said he went to catch a flight. He said that the uniform he was wearing represented 19 years of his life and the lives of people he had served alongside, and that what happened in that corridor was not about him specifically. It was about every person who had stood in a similar corridor, in a similar situation, without the decorations, without the footage, and without anyone coming to ask them to stand up. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to see it. The men and women who serve this country deserve better than a terminal floor. And the least we can do is make sure stories like this one are never forgotten. Like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to JPTV if you are not already part of the family.
Archives do significantly more than just preserve the past. They softly whisper the intricate stories of our world. Each story is a necessary fragment of a larger truth. Thank you for choosing to seek that truth alongside our dedicated team.